Have you ever stopped and wondered why you chose one product over another, even when they're pretty much identical? You know, we all like to think we're in the driver's seat for all our decisions. But today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the powerful, invisible architecture that guides our choices long before we're even aware it's happening. Okay, let's dive right in. Just let that sink in for a second. All that time and energy we pour into crafting the perfect message, the killer headline, the most persuasive arguments, what if it's all secondary? This suggests that while we're obsessing over the words, the real battle for a customer's decision is actually being fought and won in a silent, invisible space that we rarely even think about. It's a battle that's fought not with persuasion, but with pure psychology.
And this is the huge idea we're tackling today, that the most effective marketing isn't really about what you say at all, but about the whole environment you create around the choice. It's about understanding these deep currents of human psychology and, gently guiding a customer to a decision without them ever feeling like they've been sold to. It's about making the choice feel like their own idea.
And this, right here, highlights a massive paradox in how we do things. We build these incredibly detailed strategies and customer journeys, all assuming our user is this logical, rational person, carefully weighing the pros and cons. But the science tells a totally different story. Human choice is mostly driven by these non-conscious cognitive shortcuts. Think of them as mental rules of thumb, or like an autopilot for the brain that can completely override a careful logical thought process. This whole way of thinking wasn't cooked up in some academic lab. Nope. It came from a very real, very urgent crisis in the business world. A massive challenge for companies actually ended up creating a whole new science of selling, and it was born out of sheer necessity because the old methods just flat out stopped working.
The problem was this: commoditization. Suddenly, markets were just flooded with products that were, let's be honest, almost identical. Imagine you're selling software, or a smartphone, or even just a cup of coffee. When every feature list looks the same and all the prices are competitive, how in the world do you stand out? The old playbook, just shouting about your features and specs, it wasn't cutting it anymore. Sales were hitting a wall, and companies were forced to look for a different, much more subtle edge.
And this timeline just shows that shift perfectly. We went from this era of persuasion and features right into the crisis of commoditization. And then, everything changed. The framework that we rely on today came out of the field of behavioral economics, thanks to absolute pioneers like the psychologist Daniel Kahneman and the economist Richard Thaler. They blended psychology and economics to prove that we are not rational robots. And with that, they shifted the focus from the product itself.
And this new focus has a name: choice architecture. So the key takeaway is this: how you present the options is often way more influential than what the options actually are. It's all about being the architect of that decision-making process, carefully designing how choices are shown to make one option feel more natural, more intuitive, and just plain more appealing than the others. And the crazy part, the user often doesn't even notice the design.
Now, to really get why this works, you have to understand Kahneman's model of our two different minds. Okay, so System 2 is our slow, deliberate, rational mind. It's the one you use for a tough math problem or learning a new language. We think we use it for buying things, but we hardly ever do because it takes a ton of energy. The real driver, the one running the show like 95% of the time, is System 1. That's our fast, intuitive, automatic brain. It runs on gut feelings and shortcuts. And choice architects, they know that System 1 is the real target.
So if we're targeting that fast-thinking System 1 brain, how do we actually do it? What are the tools? Well, you can kind of think of it like an engine. It's an engine powered by 3 core subconscious levers that, when they're used together, create this powerful and almost irresistible pull toward one specific choice.
And here they are, the big 3: framing, defaults, and cognitive fluency. Each one targets a very specific psychological tendency of our intuitive brain. When they all work together in unison, they create this nearly frictionless path to the decision you want. So let's break each one down.
All right, first up is framing. This one is all about context. It dictates how an offer is perceived before your logical brain even gets a chance to kick in. The classic example is a package of ground beef framed as 80% lean or 20% fat. It's the exact same product, but the frame instantly changes how you feel about it. A really key part of framing is using what's called loss aversion, our scientifically proven tendency to feel the pain of a loss about twice as strongly as the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
Next up, and maybe the most powerful of all, are defaults. A default is simply the option that's pre-selected if the user does nothing.
This lever is just incredibly effective because it taps into our basic human inertia. I mean, think about your streaming subscriptions that just auto-renew, or software that comes with pre-checked boxes. We naturally prefer the path of least resistance. Making a different choice requires actual cognitive energy. It's effort. And our System 1 brain is hardwired to save that energy whenever it can.
And finally, we have cognitive fluency. This is really just about how easy your message is to understand. See, a message that's simple, clear, and just effortless to process, it feels more true and more trustworthy to our intuitive brain. Complexity, jargon, confusing designs, that all creates friction. It's like a speed bump for System 1, forcing it to slow down and call in the slow, skeptical System 2. Simplicity, on the other hand, it signals safety and lets System 1 just glide forward with confidence.
Okay, so we've covered the what, those three levers. But now let's go a level deeper into the why. Why are these subtle little design choices so profoundly good at steering our behavior? Well, it all comes down to tapping into the fundamental psychology of ease.
Here's the most crucial point. This entire system is built on a simple, universal human truth. Our brains are, for lack of a better word, lazy. And I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean it in an efficient way. They're designed to conserve energy. This whole approach works by ethically leveraging that hardwired preference for simplicity, designing the path of least resistance to go directly to the outcome you want. It's about making the right choice the easiest choice.
And wow, this chart right here really just quantifies that inertia, doesn't it? This is the power of what's called the status quo bias in action. When people are presented with a pre-selected default option, a staggering majority, we're talking up to 95% in some studies, will just stick with it. Why? Because changing it requires effort. It forces you to fire up that slow, energy-hungry System 2 brain. Keeping the default, that's easy. It is the path of least resistance. This single principle, by the way, explains why changing organ donation from an opt-in to an opt-out system can dramatically increase donor rates. It's that powerful.
And that brings us right back to the psychology behind framing. Prospect theory, which is another Nobel-winning idea from Kahneman, proves that the negative feeling of losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the positive feeling of gaining the exact same thing. Think about it. The pain of losing $50 feels way worse than the joy of finding $50, right? That's why framing a choice around what a customer stands to lose if they don't act, don't miss out on these benefits, is so often much more compelling than framing it around what they stand to gain.
Okay, we've covered the theory and we've gone deep into the psychology. All fascinating stuff. But how do we actually turn this into action? Let's shift gears from the science to the strategy, and I'll show you how this all builds into a clear, actionable blueprint that you can really apply.
The path to mastering this is a deliberate, three-step process. This isn't guesswork. First, you engineer the default. Second, you systematically test the frame. And third, you relentlessly, ruthlessly maximize cognitive fluency. Let's walk through each one.
Step 1. Engineer the default. This is all about making your best option the easiest option. Your most profitable choice, whether that's the annual plan over the monthly one or the premium tier over the basic one, it should always be the pre-selected default choice. What you're doing is using that powerful force of inertia to guide customers toward the most valuable outcome, for them and for you. The goal is to make it feel like a helpful suggestion, not some kind of trick.
Step 2. Test the frame. This is not about your gut feeling, it's about data. You absolutely have to A/B test how you present your value. Pit a gain frame against a loss frame. So, for example, you could test messaging like, get 20% more features with premium, against something like, stop losing out on 20% of the value by staying on basic. Then you measure the results, you analyze the conversion rates, and you let the data tell you which psychological frame is more powerful for your audience.
And step 3, maximize cognitive fluency. And this one requires you to be ruthless in your simplification. Go through every single word, every image, every little element of your design and ask yourself, can this be simpler? Can this be clearer? Get rid of all the industry jargon. Use a clean, obvious visual hierarchy that just guides the user's eye effortlessly to where you want it to go. You have to burn this golden rule into your brain. Clarity accelerates decisions. The easier your offer is to understand, the faster your customer will say yes.
So, as we start to wrap this up, let's just crystallize the ultimate goal of this entire approach. It's really about a fundamental shift in perspective, moving away from persuasion and toward architecture, all leading to what we can call the automatic choice.
If there is one single thing you take away from this explainer, let it be this. Your highest point of leverage is not your argument,
It is not your list of features or your carefully worded pitch. The highest point of leverage is the environment in which the choice itself is made. You have to stop trying to shout at the rational, logical System 2 mind, and instead start quietly designing the decision-making environment for the powerful, intuitive System 1 mind.
And that brings us to our final thought. The very best marketing doesn't push people through a funnel with force or aggressive tactics. No, it gently pulls them toward value by designing a path of such little resistance that the right choice, well, it feels like the only choice. It feels easy, it feels right, it feels automatic.